All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It is October 12th, 2022. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. If you're struggling to understand what it takes to operate successfully in AWS, you're not alone. The good news is that Cloud Posse has helped companies just like yours turn things around. We have a proven, repeatable plan that we'd like to share with you. So if you're just curious to learn more, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and you can book a call with me directly. For those of you new to the call, the format's very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered today, believe it or not. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/officehours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. If you want to participate, you can obviously do so, but keep in mind that everything is recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. So if you want to enjoy our content and support what we do over here, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Just go to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, that's youtube.com/cloudposse. So with that said, I have some light announcements today. Well, I guess it's a little heavier than maybe I let on. There were a bunch of things that came out of HashiConf. And I guess the link I did is not viewable because I'm outside of the session that I viewed it in. So yeah, let's see here, reconstituting it from memory. So one of those announcements is that Terraform Cloud now has a kind of no-code platform, or is coming out with one. It wasn't entirely clear to me the state of that or the maturity of that offering. The no-code offering is under active development. The idea is that your company can publish a bunch of Terraform root modules somewhere, kind of like in a catalog. Self-service style portal within Terraform Cloud allows developers to type in some variables for that root module and provision it, entirely done within the UI. What stood out to me as something that I didn't like, so first of all, I thought that was cool. That's the next logical progression, of course, for Terraform Cloud to do something like that, make it very easy to provision new workspaces from existing Terraform root modules. What I didn't like about it, at least initially, is that it is not ultimately backed up by VCS. I think it'd be kind of cool if whatever they did was ultimately backing up to a version control system, so you can always walk away and you have your infrastructure defined. In this case, now Terraform Cloud is in the critical path of absolutely everything that is deployed that way. Perhaps one of the benefits of this is you could imagine integrating this type of functionality into a platform like ServiceNow, where it literally just calls like a webhook and brings up an environment. And since it doesn't have to go through any GitOps process, that might happen pretty smoothly. Anyone else know more about this no-code offering from Terraform Cloud? All right. So another interesting announcement from HashiConf was a slight change in direction. I'm not going to say it's definitely not a pivot. It's just extending HashiCorp Vault to work in a push model instead of always being a pull model. So HashiCorp Vault, as everyone is probably familiar with, is HashiCorp's flagship secrets management solution. It dominates the industry. Anywhere you need serious secrets management, automatic key rotation, public key infrastructure, PKI, and so forth. Well, what they are now adding support for is a first of at least many things. One is the ability to push secrets into Kubernetes. This is kind of cool because up until this point, well, you could have relied on operators like the external secrets operator, which is a great operator, and it can source secrets from Vault and push them into Kubernetes. But now Vault can just do that directly. So when things change in Vault, they can immediately update the secret in Kubernetes. This reduces the overhead, or basically the request volume against your Vault infrastructure, and would be more performant. Plus, if you're using native Kubernetes secrets, you get all those benefits. Now imagine like the future of that could be pushing to other systems, where Vault could be very intelligent about the hard parts, like how do you do automatic rotation? And that isn't a problem solved by all the password managers out there. It isn't solved by SSM and so forth. So when you use things like SSM and ASM, you get a cloud native experience with that platform. Like in this case, I'm talking about Amazon Web Services. And ASM and SSM are natively integrated into services like ECS, right? So it would be nice if the two could play together in a more native way. And that's why HashiCorp Vault is starting to look into pushing secrets out instead of insisting to be the single source of truth to pull secrets from. Any other interesting observations about HashiCorp Vault from HashiConf?
Well, I was going to say that sounds really interesting. I did not know that there was no solution for that outside of workload identity, which is something that I'm trying to find an equivalent to. But it's also not the same.
Yeah, I think it's solving slightly different problems, but
well, key rotation, right? And being able to manage all of that wasn't possible with Kubernetes before, but you don't manage your keys at all with workload identity. You're kind of abstracting that away entirely.
Yeah. Yeah, I am not entirely up to speed on workload identity myself, so I cannot talk about that.
Fair enough, fair enough.
But anybody else, feel free to chime in, because I always love to learn. So that's why I do these office hours, for selfish reasons. Teach me. All right. Next announcement from HashiConf. Let's see here. I need to dig up my notes since the email didn't load up here. Anybody else have some announcements while I dig that up?
Didn't that buy replicated? Was that recent?
Replicate, what was that?
Replicated.
You mean the service replicated?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's come up previously on office hours. Do they have something new?
I missed that office hours entirely. I thought I saw it on my newsfeed. So
oh, I mean, replicated has been around for like 8 years or something. I mean, it's not a new company. It's been around since before Cloud Posse. Yeah. But yeah, replicated is an interesting thing to bring up for companies looking for this. So the company we're talking about this time is replicated. And it's a pretty easy concept to understand if I reposition it this way, at least for me, is that remember back in the day, all those Windows installers you had to install these heavy apps like Microsoft Office, and replicated is that for the container era, where you want to deliver your enterprise software to on-prem installations where you have no idea, are they using Kubernetes? Are they using ECS? Are they using Azure? Are they using GKE? Are they have none of that. How do you ship your software when you have no control over the parameters? It's a really hard problem to solve. We've helped some customers think through that process and reduce some of the options that they would consider. Well, replicated is an installer basically for your enterprise apps for on-prem that handles every possible, distribution deployment mechanism that you could imagine. Yeah, this is not a sponsored pitch. This is just, I think they solve an interesting problem.
I think that's actually how you deploy Terraform Enterprise. They have a replicated package for it.
Yeah, at least at one point. I don't know if they're still doing it, but I know they were a partner for them. Yeah.
Not that long ago, I know someone who did it, within the last few months, and it was still replicated.
Very interesting. Yeah, so if you have a complex kind of enterprise-y product that you would like to add like other distribution channels, this could be a way that you can add that and increase revenue perhaps. Any was there something else you wanted to bring up in regards to replicated?
No, I just thought it was very recent, and was like announced at the conference, but I was completely wrong about that.
Ah, okay, gotcha. I understood.
I
So
think the other cool thing that replicated gives you that especially in highly regulated environments is the ability to install this stuff in air gapped environment, like air
yeah,
gapped environments
yeah.
as well. So it packages all of your um, dependencies without the need for internet access, basically, and you can have just that one package to install it, which is kind of cool.
Yep, that's cool. All right, so the two other announcements that stood out to me, obviously this is based on kind of my filter on what I'm interested in out of the HashiCorp ecosystem, is Waypoint. So Waypoint, you know, has been announced like 2 years or so ago, but work keeps chugging away at it. I think Waypoint, if you're not familiar with it, it struggled, I think, with a little bit of an identity crisis. I'm just pulling it up here, HashiCorp Waypoint. So how it's been described to me now in a way that makes it a little bit more concrete on what it is, because in official marketing materials, like they won't call it CI, they won't call it CD, and they certainly won't call it CICD. And they're not necessarily calling it a pass, but it has elements of all of that. So it's kind of weird that they're trying to invent this new category. And I think what they're trying to do is define this category now of calling it kind of application deployments as code. So a particular pattern of how to achieve application deployments in a declarative way. And application deployments, of course, involve a little bit of workflows, a little bit of CI, a little bit of deployment, a little bit of packaging, and a little bit of a UI. And they want to have something that ties that all together. So if you're using GitHub Actions or Circle CI, you got part of that, but it's not necessarily declarative end-to-end on that whole piece. If you're familiar with back in the day Heroku or similar platforms like it, they kind of invented that category. There isn't really a great self-hosted Heroku alternative, and I kind of see Waypoint as jostling to become that, but it's not there today. So one of the things that they have announced as part of HashiConf is the hosted Waypoint endpoint can now be managed by HashiCorp Cloud Platform. This is nice because it makes it very easy to have ephemeral preview environments using Waypoint, and those have and those environments can be on your laptop. And your laptop doesn't need to be publicly exposed because it establishes a tunnel between the Waypoint cloud and your laptop, or obviously your CI system or wherever you're going to be deploying with Waypoint. And Waypoint supports deployment targets of ECS and Kubernetes and GKE and Nomad and tons of other ways of deploying apps. The next thing that they announced, so Waypoint up to this point was very opinionated on the steps. It's build, test, deploy. End of story, nothing else. That was a kind of initial push just to get something out there and reduce the variability. They have now extended it to support custom workflows. So now it's build, test, deploy, and anything else you want to do. What's interesting about this is if you remember GitHub Actions, going back to its inception like 2-3 years ago or whatever it is now, the very initial versions of GitHub Actions were using HCL. I think GitHub Actions made the prudent choice to drop that, not depending on like one smaller vendor at the time, esoteric configuration language, and went with something pretty mainstream like YAML. But it was still it was kind of beautiful to look at if you compared to some complex YAML pipelines. Anyways, custom workflows basically look like GitHub Actions in the early days when it was all defined in HCL. I don't know if I can pull up Waypoint custom workflows. Yeah, so it looks like it hasn't gotten to SEO yet to make it easy to pull up an example here. Maybe this here. Let's see. Yeah, not well. Yeah, not really. So I'm excited and not excited at the same time about these things. For me, kind of like CICD is now a solved problem with us being a shop predominantly working with GitHub and GitHub Actions working just magically together with the platform, and you drop a workflow file and it's just there. I like that. With any system that isn't by the vendor providing your VCS, then there's going to have to be this extra jump to set up the integrations, add the repositories, configure workflows and things like that. And I hope they solve that. I hope they make it as easy as just adding a workflow file and Waypoint works, because that'll make that experience magical for developers. I don't know if that's the case though. Anything else to add about Waypoint? Somebody following it more closely?
On first glance, this looks very awesome for somebody who's got almost no release engineering built into the platform yet and is struggling right now to do all of it at once. This is like an incredible bridge between nothing and having some Terraform to like having also workflows and Terraform.
Yeah, I agree. I just caution it with one thing, that it is still relatively early in Waypoint's history. They don't have a production story yet. Depending on where you are at in the life cycle of your business and company, I think this is going to be solved by next HashiConf. I think it's going to be, dude, deploy production workloads with Waypoint. That's the way to go. I don't think that story is there yet. And you'd be a very, very early adopter carving a path that no one else has really carved yet.
All right. All right.
But just word of caution. I say this with massive FOMO, like, I always want to jump on the latest and greatest tool. Just been burned by it a number of times. All right, that's it for my HashiConf announcements. Before I move on to any more announcements here, anyone have something to bring up related to HashiConf? All right.
Well, technically number 4 is a HashiConf announcement, right?
This was technically HashiConf as well. So let's bundle that with it. So Matt, you want to talk about this a little bit? I know you haven't had a chance to go so deep on it yet, but.
Yeah, I think so. For anyone that builds Terraform providers or has built one, you probably know that there was like a progression. So there was an SDK that they originally released, the SDK version 1, and then at some point in the lifetime of that, they decided to improve on how you build providers, and they improved the SDK and they released SDK version 2. And now they have decided on hopefully what will be the last iteration of that is to move to this thing that they're calling the Terraform plugin framework. And really what it is it's a replacement for the provider SDKs that used to exist, with a whole bunch of additional abstractions that make doing a lot of the things you needed to write a bunch of code to do before, much simpler and much cleaner. And they've really improved the local development and testing story and acceptance testing stories around how you build a provider in this new framework. And essentially they've moved it to a fully standalone binary. So in this new version, what will actually happen is when it downloads a plugin, it will support this new interface that Terraform will call and start, and your plugin will run as a server. And it supports gRPC, and then they basically just communicate with it externally, like over gRPC back and forth, and then at the end of the Terraform run, it will stop the server that's running in the background. So it's really turning providers into full like standalone servers or services, if you will, that support a common interface. So it will give it. I expect that over time we'll actually have more flexibility about what aspects of Terraform we can actually control and edit and do different things like that. So I don't know. That's my quick take on it.
Can it, does it work kind of like the Porcelain plugins for Helm and other languages? I think that's what they're called. When you can also then jack into the Terraform CLI itself and be a subcommand. Can you do that with it or no?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to frame. So there's a claim in their documentation and marketing material that says you have full control over every aspect of Terraform in there, but I actually couldn't find documentation yet on how you could like add your own built-in functions, for example, or plug into the CLI. Or any of those kind of things, right? But I can't find how you would do that yet, so I just haven't had enough time to spend like hacking around with it to figure it out. So maybe I'll give an update next week after I have a little bit more time to play with it.
That will be so transformational if we could add our own functions in Terraform.
Yeah.
Not have to wait for to get into the core or whatnot. That would put them out of the shooting range for everybody pissed that they don't add this or this function, and we could actually distribute functions that way. And obviously the subcommand thing would be appealing to us, of course, since then we could make some of our functionality just built into Terraform itself. Like that would be so cool.
Yeah, in theory, like Atmos could become like a provider version of it, like so that you could actually run Terraform natively and not actually run Atmos as a wrapper around it, as an example.
You wouldn't even need to necessarily really be aware of it.
Yeah,
that's cool. All right. Any questions about that or things to add from the audience?
The one thing that I'll say is to write a provider now, the learning curve just way flattened out from the example that they provide and all the abstractions that they now add. Like writing a provider is much simpler than it was before.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So, how painful is it? I saw they have a migration guide. How painful is it going to be?
I didn't actually look, but I suspect not that bad. Like, we probably just throw away a lot of the plumbing code, and then you just keep your resource code, and you can move some things over. So it doesn't look like it'll be terrible.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next announcement then is actually one was also related to you. I didn't, to be honest, I didn't submit my email address to read more, but you shared it with me. So I guess you got something you want to highlight, anything?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that the guys who did this study basically looked at something like 1,100 Kubernetes environments and looked at how people are operating in them, what they're doing, kind of top to bottom, and then they took the results of all their findings and published them in this study, which I thought was pretty interesting. It was a pretty good read. I'll say, just to be fair, I read it. I read it quickly and didn't deep dive into a lot of the things, but I highlighted some things I want to go back and look at in it. But I figured I would share it since it was interesting to me at a high level.
Anybody familiar with Humanitech as a business?
I've been going to a number of their webinars. For the past, I don't know, month and a half or so. There's a lot of interesting talks for sure. their pushes for this platform engineering as self-service. So there definitely seems to be this buzz building up about self-service platforms as the next big step in DevOps. And I've even heard I think they post something at some point that DevOps is dead, and platform self-service environments are the next step, because in reality, of course, no developer can learn everything that's needed to do DevOps. It worked for a very small team in early stages, but in practice, pretty soon a developer who knows Kubernetes ends up having to switch over to managing the clusters and what have you. So anyways, that's where that comes from, and it definitely seems like it's developing into an interesting direction.
Yeah, it just cracks me up because we had another talk not that long about like platform teams are dead, and everyone's for calling it out. What's the future?
Yeah. So the one thing I will definitely say is that the organization in the study that I referred to, in the organizations that that have adopted self-service or developer self-service are considered like the most advanced and healthiest in their view. So it's like obviously somewhat self-serving from a marketing perspective, but also probably true. But it's also probably true, like in general. So
it makes sense for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, and I'm just trying to be funny here. I mean, obviously, we believe that companies need a platform. We predominantly push companies towards ECS or Kubernetes on AWS. Now, when they talk platforms, they're obviously talking a higher level of abstraction to those platforms. And I think Vlad's point, who had tweeted this controversial tweet, like platform teams are dead, and so forth, just brought up a very good point that resonated with us, is that what these platforms abstractions always fail to do is keep up with the rate that our industries move. And they are the latest and greatest and the best and brightest on what is here today. And then next year they fail to keep up. Their documentation falls behind, and they're solving a very hard problem. And I'm skeptical that things have stabilized enough as an industry that you can say, hey, yeah, we're going to go with this third-party vendor platform. And that's why we kind of say, I think the jury's still out. Let's just stick with a lower level platform like Kubernetes or ECS directly without abstracting it yet.
Yeah, I think the UK government is like the one that everyone points to with that, where they spent all this time and money to build it out and on top of like Mesos, and then by the time they finally got it like launched, everyone was like, "Who the hell's using Mesos anymore?" Like, and then they're like, "Oh, wait, we're screwed now. Now we have to figure out the next version of the platform." So I think that's a perfect example.
Yeah, well, and I agree, and the way that I've been dealing with that with my customers is that I end up maybe building some like a light form of what Humanitech has in mind, where I'll take some of the the DevOps business rules that the group needs, right? So if they're using one Kubernetes cluster, or many of them, or how are they coding their infrastructure, what kinds of things do they need to deploy? Is it only Lambdas? Is it only containers? Is it a bit of both? And I bring all that together in a CLI kind of thing that, has worked out really well. And it's different for every one of my projects, right? And that allows them basically to not have to know all the details of, say, Kubernetes or Terraform. They need to know a little bit, but basically, a lot of the details that are nitty gritty are in the this CLI.
Yeah, the CLI based approach, like custom CLI approach.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is a perfect segue to my next announcement. So, we talked a lot about Atmos on here. That's our little baby. If you go to cloudposse.com/Atmos, this is how we kind of capture all the business logic of running workflows with purpose-built workflows around Terraform and Helm file and support for custom workflows, etc. So we're going to do a demo of this next Wednesday. RB on the team's going to drive that demo and just kind of show you what it looks like and feels like in case you're curious and want to see what else is out there. So Atmos is a somewhat of an alternative to tools that you might be familiar with, tools like TerraGrunt or TerraSpace. Atmos is in that category, but not tied to Terraform, unlike the other tools in the category, which are. All right. Any other announcements in our industry, things you'd like to bring up before we go into Q&A? All right, then Q&A it is. So we have, let me double check the office hours Slack channel here. I kind of dug around Slack for some questions I thought we could answer. Doesn't look like anyone has posted any questions, so I'll just go ahead and bring one up. So it was asked by someone in our Slack community, does anybody have experience with AWS EKS using AWS EFS? I need a place to store and read some data about 5 to 10 megabytes very fast and have it available consistently on multiple pods. So this was kind of a little bit of an XY problem. If you're not familiar with that, there's a great website, xyproblem.info, which is when you ask kind of about the solution without stating too much the problem or what some of the constraints are. So EFS is one of the ways you could solve this, of course. As RB pointed out, Cloud Posse by default, when we deploy EKS, we'll also deploy the EFS CSI driver. This is the storage driver for Kubernetes, so you can use EFS as the default storage backend. Now, why do we do that? We do that because most things don't require extremely low latency, high performance read writes, etc., and just need a place to stash some temporary cache files or uploads in transit before they get pushed to S3 or somewhere else, for example. Now, that works well because in Kubernetes, if you're just using persistent volumes and your service restarts, it's always locked to that zone. They can't bounce around. And if you use EFS, those services can bounce around. So that's why we recommend that. But this is an interesting problem here where it's only, it sounds like 5 to 10, it's a single file, it sounds like, since it's not plural here. A 5 to 10 megabyte file, and they need access to it very quickly. So I thought we could just brainstorm without knowing more, a couple ways you could solve that. And obviously one way is using multi-layer Docker images, but of course that would require redeployment of your service when that changes, but it has the added advantage of consistency and rollbacks. I think one consideration here is, if that file is corrupted or something else, what happens to your service? We've had this issue like running Prometheus back in the day in Kubernetes, and Prometheus is, I forget what it's called, but the data file could get corrupted, and then it just wouldn't restart. So what happens in that situation? It's not clear if it sounds like it's just reading data. So we don't really need to worry about writing it or updating it. So I think like Alex's question, or statement, what about using S3 is a fair one. I posted another link here. Amazon just released their file cache service. I'm not that familiar with it, but it addresses this particular use case. Any other ideas, solutions?
You could probably implement a CRD and actually store it in the pod. Yeah.
It could be a CRD that actually fetches it and mounts it as a file into the containers. And when that changes, every pod will be reloaded and then have access to that. That's
Yeah.
actually a nice pattern. Like if I was talking about like that corruption, what happens if like that, like, let's say you're storing that on S3 and that download is corrupted. You have to have all this other error handling, right? To retry it, make sure that you should probably have a checksum on that file to make sure what you downloaded is not corrupted. And these are like those aspects of operationalizing something that's so trivial that we often overlook in implementing it. So what I like about your solution, Matt, is all of that could be built into the operator, and it doesn't need to be handled in every application, and it could be generalized using Kubernetes concept.
I've got
Yeah,
another.
at first that,
Sorry.
sorry, I was just gonna say really quickly, at first I was thinking about using a Kubernetes secret, but I think that's limited to meg in total size.
They are.
Yeah.
Config maps and secrets are pretty limited in size.
Yeah.
All right. Any other ideas?
This is a little bit off topic because it's very particular for ML workloads, but Google came out with something called TensorStore, and I was reading into it last night, and it's very specifically solves this problem, which is like concurrent access to a bucket in error handling, but for like tensor type data. So you can read like an Avro file, just like an enormous file, and like an array of data somehow reliably across many pods from storage. And that was like the design goal here. Now, obviously that's not applicable here, but it kind of is a little bit. It's interesting that they have to create a specific technology to actually handle that. That use
I
case.
could understand that.
Well-
Like for that, you have terabyte size files possibly.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like TensorFlow is specifically for reading really large multi-dimensional arrays, like so that it can operate on those things from a machine learning perspective. So it's
Correct.
optimized specifically for multi-dimensional arrays, not just general file reading.
Yeah.
This is true, but also parallel file reading is something that they talk about in the paper that they wrote. There's like a baseline, but I know what you're saying. It'd be kind of ridiculous to to use it in the way that I just described.
I feel like doesn't Kubernetes have like the concept of like a shared read-only volumes or something that can be mounted multiple times?
It's not like an etcd thing. I know it's not the same, but
Nothing jumps out based on my quick Google there, but all right. That's all I got to add for you. That was a question asked by Gabriel in the AWS channel on sweetops. So the next question, I forget if we got to it last week. Alex Box had a question. If anyone has a solution they could share for running analytics over historical alerts from Alert Manager. I don't have anything I can add to that. Alex, are you on the call today? And maybe we don't have Alex here, so can't clarify it. All right. Next one was something I caught my attention on Reddit, and it caught my attention because it's something I frequently see people approaching multi-region for the first time or early on in their terraforming career. And I thought I would address it, how we think about multi-region when you're doing Terraform. I'm not saying it's the holy grail, but it's a consideration. So this is, first of all, really common. When you'll see people define multiple providers here. They should be, with different aliases, for example. And then your module can Terraform all the resources over all the regions, and end of, your job is done. Great. This suffers from two big fundamental problems. One is that, well, why are you going multi-region in the first place? Is it for high availability and DR? Now your Terraform module is designed to be coupled to both regions. So your Terraform is not DR capable. So that's the first reason that's a telltale sign to me that something is wrong if you're using multiple providers for the same cloud across regions to Terraform things. That's of course fine if that's not what you're trying to solve for, just to be aware of. The next is, well, what about like if a very real problem we had to grapple with a couple of years ago at Cloud Posse was deploying things like Security Hub. And Security Hub by convention is deployed into every default AWS region which cannot be disabled, plus every other region that you've enabled and have presumably resources deployed. So we're talking at least 17 regions, possibly 25 or more. And it looks really, really, really ugly when you have to have all of these provider blocks. So
And it takes forever.
And it takes forever, right? You have this, like we did this in the beginning because we didn't have another choice. I think we went down the logical route most people would do is they use the Terraform generation, some code generator. I think we were using Terraform to generate Terraform at that time. There's been other tools.
I wrote a for loop.
We talked about, there's a TerraPlate, was just something that we talked about on office hours a couple weeks ago, which is a Go wrapper for Terraform that will help you generate your Terraform code. And I think tools like that frequently exist because people run into this problem is like, how am I going to have dynamic kind of support for regions when Terraform doesn't support dynamic provider blocks? You cannot have a module that iterate. You cannot in your root module iterate over child modules that need different provider configurations, if that makes sense. So that would be the logical solution, but that's not supported by Terraform. So how do you solve this? Well, that's what we do at Cloud Posse, and how we deploy our infrastructure is we think of it from the DR perspective and the availability perspective, that if you're deploying multi-region components like Security Hub or AWS config and so forth, is to break it down by region. So if I go into our stack configurations, we'll have, here's like our CP Live organization with organizational units therein. We'll go into our platform OU and look at staging. So here, if we wanted to operate in multiple regions, we would have a configuration for each region. So in this case, the US East 2, and perhaps one for US East 1 or US West 1. And the component is the Terraform root module, like the VPC, and that has its own state and its own single provider, and it's deployed and managed in each region individually. So that means that your blast radius is minimized. You can target regions for upgrades. You can do rolling upgrades of regions. You can have much faster plan and apply life cycles. It opens up just a lot of better opportunities and patterns. So that's my 2 cents. Anybody, disagree with that? That's fine. Let me know. Speak up.
Just one use case that I come across actually, which is not DR related, took me by surprise. A few weeks ago. It was related to CloudFront, and there was something I think. The stack had to be deployed in CA Central 1, but CloudFront had something. Maybe it was related to WAF, or I don't remember now. Required, maybe the cert or something like that.
That's what I said. The ACM certificate needs. Can only be created in US East 1.
Yeah, and I wrestled with that for a little bit because I really did not want to expose the fact that this module needed this extra region to the root module, right? It's kind of an implementation detail.
Yeah.
And it ends up, you end up having to trickle that information all the way up to the root module and use a custom provider with an alias. It's a little unfortunate. Hopefully, at some point, HashiCorp can improve on that.
Oh, that's not a HashiCorp thing, I think. That's just Amazon fundamentally how it's implemented.
No, I think you just means like the fact that you have to configure, there's no for loops over providers,
Oh,
or you can't dynamically
exactly.
change the provider in the beginning,
Yeah.
like how
Okay.
they handle the provider.
Or even to, to hide that detail as an implementation for the module that was using CloudFront. I would just like to be able to say, okay, in this inner module, regardless of what the outer module uses, I need a US East 1 provider for that CloudFront. The user of the module should not care and should not have to know about that. But now the user of the module needs to provide an extra provider that has the right alias that the inner module will be able to use, you see?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the exception along those lines is, what Oliver was talking about. And also in replication scenarios, like if you are setting up replication between like two buckets, as an example, you need like a source and a destination region for them, or
I think it's
those types of things. Yeah.
I call that this like a provider tuple pattern. I think it's acceptable to have two, and that's when you're doing exactly what you said, connecting to resources, transit gateways, DNS delegation, replication. Yeah. That's good. All right. That was did I have any other questions lined up here? Yeah, that's all I had. Any questions anybody has wants to bring up on the call today?
I have a question. Has anyone used blast radius?
What is that? I mean, I know conceptually what it is. I don't know of a service called that.
No, well, it's a Terraform, I guess, static analyzer that does some analysis of your Terraform code and gives you a visual representation of your infrastructure. That's why they call it blast radius, I guess.
It's super cool.
Is this the project here?
Scroll down a little bit. So this one, I think, is the one that hasn't been updated in a long time, and there's been a fork made of it. It's called blast radius -fork. Yeah. Oh, I think I just saw it scroll by there. Where did I just see it? No. Okay, no, I thought I saw it there. But yeah, in the GitHub, just append -fork to the name that you had there.
Okay. At what part?
Go to the it's not the same. It's not the same user, maybe. So do search for jump and put in. Blast radius -fork. I think should come up with something. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the one.
No stars yet, so.
Yeah, it's very, very early stage. But it has some pretty neat ideas in there of how to, filter out certain branches of your state resources and their interdependencies.
It's nice to see.
So, what is it? If I go to, so Spacelift, if you're familiar with, does something similar to that. So if you go to a stack, resources, I believe. This is then a graph of everything deployed here in this organization, and you can start drilling down by these as well. So it's not as intimidating, for example.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, interesting.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Does it help me map resources to, say, GitHub repos or working directories?
Yes and no. So what's cool about it is you can filter by, interesting. So what I was going to say is you could filter by repository, but it looks like this view does not do that. When you go to stacks here, this supports a filter by repository. So here I could see everything, and we have this mono repo for our Terraform infrastructure, so it's not that exciting to look at. But you could definitely have more repositories, for example, in a large organization, and then you could start filtering down by that.
Pretty cool.
All right, more questions, anyone? Anything in the chat? Oh, thank you, Isaac, for sharing that tweet earlier. I didn't see that. Yeah, here was the thread. All right. Any? Yeah, so here's the key platform intranet, but he does a good description of the problem and why that is. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm out of material, folks. I think we can end things a little bit early today. I'll wrap things up here. Thank you everyone for joining our call today. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, I encourage you to do that. If you want to stay on top of all of our office hours. We also have a podcast. If you go to podcast.cloudposse.com, you can catch up on all back episodes of office hours as well. Just go to youtube.com/cloudposse or go to podcast.cloudposse.com and you can listen to it any way you listen to podcasts. If you're curious about what it takes to work with Cloud Posse and if we can actually solve some of the challenges you have, the easiest way to find out is just book a call with me. Go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz. And I look forward to talking with you. If you're a developer and looking to connect, please reach out at linkedin.com/in/Osterman. I love to stay in touch with what everyone's doing. It's how I stay on top of all the cool tools and announcements. And if you're interested in joining us next week on office hours, make sure you register. Go to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, cloudposse.com/office hours. Thanks everyone for your time today. And we'll talk to you next week. Adios.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks. See ya.